Did you know that Utah Valley used to be called Utah Lake Valley? Welcome to Utah Lake, Explore More, the official podcast of the Utah Lake Authority. I'm Sam.
And I'm Courtney.
And in this podcast, we'll explore one of Utah's most important natural resources, Utah Lake. We'll talk with recreation experts, community leaders, conservation professionals, and the people who know the lake best.
If you joined us on our last episode, you probably heard a little bit about settling the valley, the ecological cascade that followed, the water fights, and then our endangered species, the June sucker. Today we're going to finish up the history of Utah Lake and dive in a little bit more. We're going to start out talking about the industrial abuse of the Utah Valley.
Real quick, I realized I have to explain where that hook came from at the beginning of our episode.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Because people are probably like, wait, what? It's never been called Utah Lake Valley. What is he talking about? It actually comes from this book, just so that we know that this is not just Sam speaking. On Zion's Mount, it's a book written that talks about Mount Timpanogos, actually in the story of how that name came to the mountain here in our valley. Because if you look at old maps, it's not what it was called, right? They didn't have a name for it. It wasn't named. But in the introduction and the beginning in chapter 1, he actually explains about how Utah Lake used to be the center of the valley. And he says that it literally was called Utah Lake Valley. And as we talk through some of the things that you'll learn from us today in the episode, you'll see why. Utah Lake was the center of the valley. We talked last time about how it was a food source. This time we're going to talk a bit more about how it was a community central source for people. So just saying, it was called Utah Lake Valley. That's not just Sam talking here. But please, Courtney, continue.
Okay, so the industrial abuse of the Utah Lake Valley or Utah Valley.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Utah Lake does too, I think.
Yeah. So as the agricultural scene and the population grew around the lake, so did dumping into the lake. So there was an issue of raw sewage being dumped, and then obviously the continued issue of fertilizer runoff into the lake. Then came along our good friend Geneva. Geneva Steel was built near the lake for World War I / just like military efforts during the time. They brought a massive growth of population, but they also heavily contaminated the lake and the Provo Bay area. They were dumping hazardous materials into there. That really damaged the lake for a really long time. And they didn't start controlling the dumpings until about the 1990s. So this went on for a really long time before it was regulated at all.
It's kind of crazy too, because the twist to this is that at the same time that all these bad behaviors were happening of overfishing and poor irrigation and pollution, the lake was growing in popularity too, right? Because there was more people coming, more people living here, more people wanted to use it.
Yeah, recreation.
It was a massive gathering place, right? I talked before about some of the things that happened during the Dust Bowl, but once there was water again in the lake, they had all kinds of stuff. There were regularly motorboat races, which you can see actual video clips of that in the Utah Lake Legacy documentary. It's pretty cool to check out. There were resorts all around the lake. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think over the course of the 1900s and the late 1800s, up through that time period, it was about 20 different resorts opened up across the lake. You can see a map of them, which if we don't have that on here, we're going to put that on here so you can see it, because I know where that map's at. You should see there were resorts all around the lake, right? Some people are aware of them. If you're watching this episode and you knew about them, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, the Saratoga one, or the Geneva one, or the Lincoln Beach one, or Provo Beach Resort, right? That name comes from the original Utah Lake Provo Beach Resort, not that really cool business over in the Riverwoods. No shout out to them, I promise. Saratoga Resort was one of the most, how do I say this? It was the latest one to open. It actually stayed open, or so I shouldn't say it was the latest to open. It was the latest to close. It opened in the 1800s, but it actually stayed open until like the 1980s in Saratoga, right? It had an indoor pool, thrill rides, a Ferris wheel, and a 2-story water slide called the Kamikaze. I think there was also a flume slide over in Geneva. A scary name, right? Makes you wonder what happened.
I don't think I would ride that.
I'm pretty sure the slide over at the Geneva Resort in Linden actually went out into the lake, if I remember correctly.
Really?
Too. Like, some pretty cool stuff happened that people were obsessed, right? You even had things like the SS Showboat. This is one I wish we would bring back to Utah Lake. This is the coolest story that I ever heard out of the Utah Lake Legacy documentary, which is these two friends decided to make basically a tour boat for Utah Lake. So it was big enough to hold 200 people, a live orchestra, a kitchen, like a restaurant, and a meeting hall space, and a dance hall. It could be either one, meeting or dance hall, and it could float in as little as 18 inches of water.
Really?
Crazy. At the time, it actually burned in like the 19-teens or 1920s. And they didn't rebuild it, but at the time it burned, the son, I think it's the son of the guy who built it, is the one they interviewed. He said the wait list was like over a year to schedule your time to get on the SS Showboat.
Wow.
So people
We should
loved
get that list
Utah
and-
Lake, right?
and fulfill it. Let's rebuild the
Try and
boat.
fulfill the
Yeah.
reservation list. You've been on back order since the 1900s. Come on out. So there was all these really cool things happening on the lake too. And then you've also got stuff like in the 1980s, you had the flood in the 1983 and 84 season. It's crazy. I've actually seen photos of the flooding at Utah Lake, particularly at the state park. And that drastically affected access at the lake and things like that as well. It engulfed a huge section of the shoreline.
Yeah, I mean, you've got all these resorts that are built literally on the shore, like, I almost said at sea level, at lake level.
At lake level, at the high water mark.
At lake level. And so if you even get like a couple inches of overflow in the lake, it's
Oh yeah,
gonna be
drastically
detrimental.
changes it.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
today, the state park, because a marina is built at or near high water level, if we hit full at the lake, they start to flood in some of their areas, right? So it is something that has to be managed carefully.
Yeah.
But it's an important element of the lake too, that water makes that big of a difference.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Utah Lake's past, but what can the lake actually become? We at the Utah Lake Authority, and part of the purpose of this podcast is to talk about this and what we're trying to do. So we are trying to flip the lake back from this turbid state to closer to its natural state. We probably won't ever actually reach like its totally natural state, but we are going to reach what we think is best, or the best that we can do for the lake based on what has happened. There are a lot of signs of hope that we have seen. So areas with heavy vegetation, such as one of our recent projects is the Provo River Delta. These areas maintain a much clearer water. In areas like this that we've been able to get in there and do a lot of like hands-on restoration work, we see a big change in the lake's health. And we definitely think that this change can spread across the rest of the lake.
Yeah, I've got sailors that I've known on the lake
Yeah.
for years now that tell me when they're out sailing, the water looks clear. They can see deeper into it. Now, granted, it's still muddy, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they're saying they can see a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet deeper than they used to be able to see. And that's because of restoration efforts, right? You
Yeah.
see the June sucker population rebounding. You see vegetation, the shoreline opening up with healthy vegetation, right? There's a lot of changes that are clear visual indicators that there is progress and hope for the lake to recover to some kind of improved
Yeah,
state.
absolutely. And again, like it's hard to say if the lake will ever return to what it once was, but through all of our efforts, we can definitely make these improvements and
For sure.
help it the best we can. We also have been doing lots of invasive species removals, both of plants and for things like carp. We've removed millions of pounds of carp. That allows the native vegetation to return. It also gives young June suckers, those native fish, a place to hide from invasive predators, and also a safe place for them to spawn. Utah Lake saved our ancestors from starvation, and now it's our turn to save the lake.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think it's important to remember a lot of what we hit on today is very high level, right? We're going through the history very quickly. If there's something that you feel like is really important, feel free to put in the comments, shoot us an email, get in touch with us and let us know what you'd like us to talk about on the podcast. And I also want to make sure that we communicate this is a huge lift. I'm not talking about the podcast, I'm talking about the lake, right? This is a multi-agency, multi-group, multi-individual work. When we talk about carp removal, there's the June Sucker Program and the Division of Wildlife Resources and Division of Water Quality and Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And maybe you didn't recognize half of those names that I'm saying, but there's so many organizations involved in this work. So when we work on the lake together, when we collaborate, when we work as a community, we make a difference, right? There's that classic age-old saying of it takes a village, right?
Yeah.
Utah Lake management takes a village. And so we appreciate the work of all of those partners, and we appreciate you as a listener watching this and listening and wanting to know more about the lake and wanting to participate. So we hope that this podcast journey can be something for you to learn, be able to share with others, and be able to recognize that there is a whole village working together trying to make these changes and help care for this lake.
And so not only does it take a bunch of scientists and a bunch of, stakeholders to manage the lake, it takes you. It takes everyone. So
Really does.
yeah. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Utah Lake Explore More. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Utah Lake, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And until next time, get outside, explore more, and we'll see you at the lake.